If people aren't actively out there trying to hire for that job, no one's going to buy it. People have to be actively looking for a solution and willing to pay money for it. I think one of the biggest mistakes is that people just don't change their pricing regularly enough. They don't look at it. People are scared to death to raise prices or even change their model. Pricing is about confidence. And making pricing changes really shakes that confidence because it can bring a lot of anxiety. Understanding what value you're bringing to your customer is probably the most important thing you can do. And it's constantly changing because the market's changing. People's perceptions are changing. Why do you exist? You guys are the same price. You say you're solving the same problem. What's the point? I really think that a product manager's job should be so busy talking to customers that they have no time for anything else. You can see this sometimes in companies. They'll be struggling for several years and it'll be like just going along fine. And they'll add a product or some feature, change it slightly. And all of a sudden it's just, oh, wow, this really hit. The reason you shouldn't use competitors' pricing is. My name is Bill Wilson, and I am the founder of Pace Pricing. I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. I've been in software for a really long time, probably about 25 years or so. I was in university or high school when I first started digging into software, and I'm really excited by it. I remember I think I took an image once and printed it out to a regular printer, but not the actual image, like the file. And it was just this pile of garbage on a page. And I was asking my professor, what does this mean? And he didn't know. I think he was also the gym teacher. So then I just dove headfirst into software. I was lucky enough that it was early enough in the software game that was still pretty new. And I landed my first gig building commercial off-the-shelf software for consumers, which was really fun. Over time, I worked through my career as a software developer, but I realized that I wanted to do something else. I was always fascinated by UX and design. If there was a special project about that on the dev team, I was the one getting involved with it. So I ended up starting a new company called Mindseek, a mobile app development and design company that I started in 2007. And I know that's a bit before the mobile stuff, but I also did a lot of BlackBerry and Windows CE and Palm OS stuff since back in the day. So I ran that for about 13 years. And during that time, we productized a lot of our services, as a lot of agencies do, productize their service, make it a little easier for people to digest and buy. And that sort of got me into this pricing idea. And we took a bit of a page from the Saas world, the good, better, best kind of model, bronze, silver, gold, that kind of thing, and built a couple of tiers for our product. And then since we were software developers, we built some software to help show that to our customers. And so at the time we were selling to a lot of B2B SaaS companies. We were building their companion apps, for example, and they all asked, where do I get this software? And with enough prodding from my VP of sales and my CFO, she was like, look, let's just go see if we can build this thing into a product and let people want it. And so we built a company. So in 2018, founded SalesRight. We focused on helping inside sales teams to sell more software, basically. And we did that with an interactive quoting tool. And that's when I had to get super deep into SaaS pricing. Like I had to understand all the models, how it's done, the tiered pricing, the volume discounts, like all of the things that go into these larger mid-market deals. And I was finding myself on the phone working with revenue leaders and VPs of sales, trying to sell them my software. Founder-led sales for the first little bit. And they all started asking me the same types of questions. What do you think of our pricing? Our pricing, I think it's confusing. What do other people do? Like, you see a lot of this. What are you seeing in the market? And so I realized that there was a lot of just like, and so that got me thinking about strategy around pricing. And I just went deep on all of that. And then during COVID, our company was acquired, which was interesting. We were acquired by a company out of Santa Barbara called Haspring. Then I didn't really know what to do. I still had the agency. I was now out of the startup and trying to figure out what to do. The great person in charge of Mindseek at the time, Ruben Hall, came to me and asked me, he said, so are you planning on coming back? Because I think he really enjoyed running it. And I said, let's talk. And he ended up acquiring the company from me in 2021. So now here I am out of both of my companies trying to figure out what to do. I loved the pricing stuff, so I started helping other founders with their pricing. Fast forward 3 years, and now I run Pace Pricing, a boutique consultancy focused on helping B2B SaaS companies nail their pricing. So yeah, that's my little spiel.
Very informative, and I appreciate your storytelling capability to really walk us through pretty comprehensive career, right? And that's usually the story of how people get into product and then eventually get into the sales game and offer creation. You start out like, hey, how do I get this like computer thing to work? And you become an indie hacker programmer. That was my story. And then it's how do I actually make people want this thing and create desirability? Then that's the UX, product design, content, all that stuff. And then you realize no one wants to buy this. And then you're getting into product and you're like looking into markets and stuff like that. And then eventually it just comes to commercializing it, like the offer, making sure it's priced right. It's the reverse slippery slope of any continuing education type person. They'll eventually move up to product and sales. I've just always noticed that. Let's say that I'm a client trying to get pricing here. What are some anti-patterns in the pricing game? Like what is a usually bad practice or like a bad mental model towards pricing? Maybe let's get the don'ts out of the way first.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing I see people do is guess. When you're building your product for the first time, what do you charge? It's a hard question to answer. One of the biggest mistakes people make beyond that is thinking about how much to charge. That's probably the wrong question to ask. The right question is, how do I charge? How do I align my product's value with what people are willing to pay for? Is it in the SaaS world? Of course, it's software as a service. It's a subscription model, but there's so many other things that go into it. What am I actually charging for? A lot of people charge per user because that's the simplest thing. I find those kinds of questions sometimes just a bit mismatched at the early days. And even as companies mature, the other mistakes I see as they mature, they'll pick a model that's working at some level and set it and forget it. 2 years will go by, 3 years will go by, 5 years will go by, and they haven't changed a thing. Now they're in trouble because things change in that period of time. You've added a ton of features to your product. You've probably changed a bunch of things. You're adding a lot more value. You understand your customers better, but you haven't changed the way you price or how much you charge. So you're effectively charging them less because it's been 5 years. And let's face it, there's some level of inflation happening there. And now you're not claiming the value of the product that you built. And so I think one of the biggest mistakes is that people just don't change their pricing regularly enough. They don't look at it. People are scared to death to raise prices or even change their model. I figured this out. Pricing is about confidence. And making pricing changes really shakes that confidence because it can bring a lot of anxiety. What I realize is that people they just don't have the tools to understand, is it going to work? And I think that's the big thing. Is if I'm going to mess with the relationship with my customer, I need to know it's going to work. That's what we try and help with. That's what I've spent my time trying to unlock for founders in my coaching, but also through Pace, we try and build confidence through data and testing. But I think that's another big kind of misstep is, not changing the pricing. They know they should change the pricing, but they back away because I don't want to say it's fear, straight fear, but it's uncertain. Procrastination is the lack of clarity, right? And I think that's what people know they should do it. And they just don't change it because it's too difficult. They don't know how, they don't know where to start.
Yeah. Like whenever I've tried to price a solo offer, I'm realizing that this is definitely one of those anti-patterns. I imagine most SaaS companies, they'll just look at other people's monthly subscriptions and they're like, oh, okay, usually it's $8, $9 a month. And then we'll charge it yearly to increase the value. Like, is there like an element of valuation of how valuable the offer is in your consideration of pricing?
Understanding what value you're bringing to your customer is probably the most important thing you can do. Constantly changing because the market's changing. People's perceptions are changing. The geopolitical climate can change it. Everything impacts what people think and value. Understanding how your customer is going to get value, what they would do instead. That's another big piece. What would they do instead and how would they solve the problem otherwise? What is that worth? Oftentimes, the best thing to do is that if you've built an offer, if you've done like a solo product, like you mentioned, and you built an offer and you're trying to figure out how much it costs and you look at your competitors. So that's another big mistake. We just look at our competitors and then we just go do whatever they're doing. And there's a few problems with that. One, if your customer's showing up and they're looking at your offer and their offer and they're exactly the same price, then why do you exist? What other value are you adding? You guys are the same price. You say you're solving the same problem. What's the point? So I think there's definitely looking at your own value. The other reason you shouldn't use competitors' pricing is that you think they've probably figured it out and they probably haven't. They probably guessed too, or they probably copied somebody else. Competitors need to be an input to your pricing so you can understand what's the cheapest, what's the most, like where's the envelope of pricing that these people that have been around longer than me are actually selling for. That's important to understand. But even more importantly is just understanding what your customer's willing to pay for it. And one of the ways you can figure out how to willingness to pay early on is hill climbing. So if you've got a new offer for a small product like that, set your price, and every 5 to 10 sales, increase the price. And just keep doing that until you start getting some pushback. You start to get 20, 30% people saying no. You may have hit the maximum willingness to pay. So you back it up and you set the price at that moment. That's not bad, but sometimes there could be a valley and then another big taller hill on the other side, which is really just another customer that has a higher willingness to pay, like a different type of customer. The problem sometimes with hill climbing is you'll get to a local maximum. Of the type of people I sell to today, this is how much they're willing to pay. But there are lots of different types of customers and they can probably get value from your solution in different ways. And that's why each of them has their own willingness to pay.
This reminds me of another story, another interview I did. It was about this logistics software company. And I was talking to its staff designer and how they increased activation by 800% by making small adjustments to the tool. And so the idea is that they're talking to this air freight company and they said, we would use your software and it has more features, but we have to use this software because it doesn't allow us to put the reference number of our customer's ERP system in there. And then you also don't have all this data. The designers, I know we have this data in the back end. Why don't we surface it? A part of it was just they didn't have a designer, lack of imagination and the customer, and surfaced a little bit more information that they already had. This wasn't like a net new functionality. Added an attribute on the database table to allow them to track that data. And then immediately they switched everything over and it led to such a huge growth in business. When I hear the laddering thing, the temptation is, oh, that's as far as we could take it. No, maybe this is a great discovery opportunity to figure out what would get you to this next tier. What's keeping you from paying a little bit more?
Yeah. And even in that example that you mentioned, like these are the things that people are willing to pay for. Like those features got surfaced and all of a sudden I would be leading with those features. If that's integrations with RFP, if we do this, we surface this data, that would be part of that story because there's clearly a group of people that need it. And that's the beautiful thing about having everybody builds their product with the best intentions, right? We all want to solve real hard problems. Is that oftentimes what we'll do is we'll figure out what we want to build for the product. We'll figure out that there's customer pains and we'll do all those things and we'll solve them and all that kind of stuff. And then we figure out how to price it. And so I think that's what's missing is that we need to flip the script a little bit and start going from idea, feature, request, customer feedback, and then filtering into the product management team is usually how that goes. The first thing the product management team should be doing at that point is how are we going to monetize this? That's the first question I'd be asking, as opposed to, okay, cool, solves your real problems. Where is this going to fit into packaging? Oh, we'll figure it out later. A lot of people don't consider that monetization question. It's a gate for me. If a feature idea comes in, it's validated, and then it goes through the monetization gate and either makes it or it doesn't. We can't figure out how to extract value from it. It doesn't go in the product.
Yeah.
So the climate that we're in right now, we can't afford to not put the high.
We can't gamble.
Yeah, we can't gamble. So if you need to increase the value of your product, because the answer to this there's lots of different answers to how do I monetize it. So if we're adding a feature to a product, we're going, okay, how do we monetize it? We're like, we can't charge directly for it. It's not an add-on, but it adds value in this particular place. We ran it through our model and this is what it looks like. It's a delighter. Maybe it gets added into the highest tier. Maybe it gets added into the mid tier because we want to boost the value of that. Decide, have we boosted the value enough that it warrants a price change? And this is that slippery slope I was talking about earlier. We're going to keep adding things to our product. That's just the nature of SaaS. And if we don't adjust pricing, we're never going to claim the value of the features. Retention is also a monetization effort, right? If a feature is being added for retention, that's a monetization play. That's what I mean. Like that lens is how I want to look at every single feature before it makes the grade. Given the climate we're in, with such a focus on being lean and generating as much profit as we can't afford to really experiment with that stuff. The other side of that coin is when we do add it, we have to know that people actually value it. And how do we do that? I always encourage people to start capturing usage data, like how people are actually using the product, feature by feature. if you possibly can, because that really helps when you've been in market for a few years and you've got lots of customers and tons of data. Now you can start looking at the data and going, is there any correlation between features? Is there things that people are using more than others? All of that can really help shape how you offer up the features and extract the most value from them.
One thing I've noticed, like every company I go to, they'll hire some head of product from a brand, like they're going to fix everything. They bring on their network, which tends to be their team from that company or similar companies. The level of rigor is not there, and they make a bunch of bad bets and then they get exited. This happens at every company I work at from a designer lens. And like now, what I've noticed is that, man, oh, it came from Google. Oh, they came from PayPal. Oh, and it's been before the end of the ZERP period. They've come from places where they can afford to lose. Like they don't have that muscle of being just like a normal business owner where every dollar counts. And I think a lot of product people, especially with the literature that's come before this last couple of years, they're hamstrung now because they're like, no, our job is to be mini CEO. Our job is to run experiments. Our job is to place bets. And it's no, your job is to grow the business and justify your salary. There's a financial component to it. And you think like every big company does this, but even like at Intuit, when they're testing out a new product, they'll just do hey, would you pay $100 to get on the wait list for this? And if they don't have a bunch of people pulling out their credit cards, just wait. Like, I'm interested. I think like the cyber, or like any Tesla demo, they do a big marketing demo. They have no ability to fulfill it. And so they're like, cool, here's $100 to get on the wait list. And then that's evidence that, oh, maybe we should invest in this.
Pre-selling is a great signal. If you've figured out a pain that people are willing to give you money for, that's a job to be done. It's not a pain. So jobs to be done is one of my favorite frameworks for this kind of stuff, is because if people aren't actively out there trying to hire for that job, no one's going to buy it. People have to be actively looking for a solution and willing to pay money for it. Some people are looking for solutions that they're not willing to pay money for, right? That happens all the time. That's why we have spreadsheets. People just roll their own, right? Because I'm not going to pay for this. We need to make sure that the things we're building, people genuinely have a need for and pay for, especially when you have those disruptive things like Rivian and Tesla. You really do need to test the market. This is new. We need to figure it out. This hasn't been around before. You really need to get in there and get those early pre-sales. Plus the pre-sales, especially those deposits, can help fund the R&D.
The R&D, yeah.
So that's a real common strategy that I recommend for a lot of bootstrappers that are early on. Just try and pre-sell it. See if you can get some through the door. But with features, it's almost the same thing. And there's lots of different ways you can do that. First of all, I think you should be talking to your customers a lot. Now, everybody says this, right? Everybody says, oh yeah, we talk to our customers, do these things. We do some interviews and stuff. And I get those emails too. Hey, someone from Intercom wants to talk to you about your product experience. That's great. But how often are you doing customer surveys? Like how often are you actually doing broad spectrum, every single one of your customers? How often are you actually talking to them about the value they get? Because that's another one of those things that people are scared to do, because they feel like it's going to interrupt the relationship with the customer. And in my experience, we do this all the time. We send out thousands of surveys to thousands of customers, and we always get great response rates. They're happy to talk about it because the people who love your product and people who hate your product both want to talk about it. The biggest unlock for me is making sure that we're taking that kind of data and funneling it directly into the product team with LLMs and all the rest. If you have a whole bunch of open text field type questions and surveys, you can do a lot to figure out what's being said, what their sentiments are, and what features really matter to them based on frequency. It surprises a lot of people what insights you can actually draw from that qualitative approach versus, oh, I need to get on the phone and talk to understand their psychology. That's super important. But broadly, is this a valuable thing to you is a great way to test in a survey. That's another way to pre-sell, is to put it out there. Hey, we're introducing, I don't know, I'll say you're like a financial accounting software. Hey, we're introducing payroll. Would you be interested in it? Yes. Are you willing to pay for it? Yes. No. Those types of questions. And I think that's like us too for a lot. And we worked with one company. I was talking to the CEO, and he was talking to his product team about the way we had generated a bunch of the product ideas that were being baked into the monetization model. And he was basically training his product team on, not training, sharing with the product team, this is another way for us to get at what customers really want, is to do these sort of broad surveys. So it's interesting.
Like all of the semi-quant qual frameworks are what we could do right now. But you got an executive education in what looks like statistics and financial modeling. It sounds like there's a black belt level going on here, because if all that stuff was enough, then we would just do that. But you seem to notice through your education choices that there's probably opportunities to take it a step further. I'm talking about the MIT Sloan executive education on your LinkedIn. It says using data to improve pricing performance. What were the things you had to unlearn from your past experience to embrace the stuff that you learned there?
That's really interesting. I was, like a lot of pricing people, very homegrown, right? Very out of necessity, right? You learn through experimentation and trying to figure those types of things. Once I started digging into a bit more formal education around it, just the stuff we were talking about, just around surveys, like being able to run willingness to pay surveys of various types, and there's 3 or 4 different pricing sensitivity meters out there you can use. That was absolutely fascinating to me, that you could go out and say, this is how they price televisions. This is how they set the price for all this. Because think about all those TVs, like all the features, all the different things, right? That was one of the things I had to unlearn, is that all of this stuff, they can structure data and questions in such a way that they can actually assign a dollar amount to every single feature. That was fascinating to me, just by asking, would you pick this one or this one for this much money? If they do that over and over again with enough people, they can start to extract all this information. So unlearning for me was like, oh, people don't set prices based on what they think it's worth, which is what we all do. I think it's worth this, but I'm not my customer. What does my customer think it's worth? And so that sort of that discipline of going, no, we can answer this question. No, we can actually answer this question. We don't need to guess. That was the big thing. Because we all like to think, oh, I feel like that would be worth this. I remember having these conversations with my co-founder. We charged per seat because we were selling to sales teams, and Salesforce set the rule that sales tools are sold by the seat. I remember talking to my co-founder about, we're more than XYZ product, or we're more than this product. No one's going to pay for that. And I'm like, we aren't our customer. We aren't the ones sitting in a sales bullpen. We're selling mid-market software at $50,000 to $300,000 a pop, trying to get this done. We're sitting here in a scrappy startup 2 years in, still working out of an incubator, figuring things out. Like we're our lens is so different than our customers. So I think that was the big sort of unlearning, is that we really just don't know.
I wonder if that's, so one of my mentors is the global head of design for QuickBooks for the accountant vertical. And they break up ownership by, what is it, IPS or ICP? I'm trying to remember the sales term. Like the persona, sales persona.
Customer profile. Yeah.
So they break it up by customer profile, because that's how you focus pricing and assess value. I've noticed this as I've gotten into more B2B SaaS and enterprise SaaS. The end user, which is something I've had to unlearn coming from a UX background, is that a lot of our mistakes as designers of software is basing our decisions, like very similar to pricing decisions, basing our design decisions off of consumer apps, where that's a very broad, generic audience and it's flexible by design. Now you're in a situation where the end user is an org chart, and the person that signs the checks for procurement is one user, and then the person that does the actual grunt work in the software is one of their team members. You can't be doing pricing discussions for the IC workflows. You have to be thinking about different surfaces that tell the CFO or the chief commercial officer that, hey, I'm getting value out of this license or this like fee structure.
Mm-hmm.
I'd imagine there's a lot of stuff that you learned in that executive education helps with that. Is like, how do you compartmentalize that process when you're going into B2B, enterprise, larger organizations?
Yeah, especially around the idea that what people are, so there's 2 things we're touching on here. One is that we've got the economic buyer and the emotional buyer, right? We have the person who's paying for it and the person who's getting the value. And sometimes those are different people. And so from a B2B sales context, you need to have the stories for both, right? You need to make sure that the product solves their actual problem and the people who are using it every day are getting tons of value out of it, because it's the number one reason they're going to keep paying for it. From the CFO or the CCO level, we have to have the right economics in place to make sure that it scales and they can predict it. So we have to have a story for both of those. In terms of the different types of customers, the biggest thing I learned around the ideal customer profile is that it is just a curve. It's a gradient. And our job isn't to go take one sliver of the gradient and go, this is where we live. We need to figure out how we can meet people where they are with what they need to solve their particular problem at that time. And then how can we go a little bit beyond that on the other side? How do we capture as much of the demand curve as possible? And that's easier said than done, because you can't do it right out of the gate. You see this all the time with companies going, oh, we're going to go up market. Oh, we're going to go down market. How many times have you seen a sales-led growth company try and go product-led? They're like, oh, we need to capture the bottom end of the market. For the other way around, a PLG company's, look, we're just getting tons of demand. We need to bring on the sales teams. We need to start doing enterprise plans. So they start going up. And that's just capturing the area under the triangle of the willingness to pay. Apple is one of my favorite examples of this. If you look at all the different price points and configurations, there's pretty much an iPhone at every $50. Whether it's just more memory, if you put them on a scale, you go, oh, this is what they're doing. People want the thing. So where do they fit on the curve? It's, oh, I've got $300. This is the one I need. I can afford to spend $1,800 or $2,000. Cool. I'm going to get the 16 Pro Max or whatever it is. That's meeting people where they are. But once people realize that it's a gradient and that we're just meeting people where they are, they stop trying to jam a whole bunch of stuff into packaging or making contrived packaging. They start to really focus on what are they trying to do? And how do we get that done for them? And what's a fair price to charge? What are they willing to?
In post-ZERP land, you can't just hire a bunch of product managers before your product market fit, because they're not the founder. They don't have the incentive structures to do what it takes to make the product successful. If you're paying them with VC money, one guest I had from customer.io, which they come from like the microcomp like group of people, drip. I think it was something about you shouldn't hire a product manager for a product line until it's kicking off at least $1 million AR. I'm not really sure what you would say to that, to say, okay, this is keeping itself alive just through merit enough that, okay, now we could move up gradient or down gradient, which I think is like another way to frame the up market, down market.
Yeah.
But it's worth a try. How do you, maybe just for listeners that are trying to figure out, where does the product manager fit when you can't raise a bunch of money to hire a bunch of like ideas people?
I think that's a great question. I'm a big fan of founder-led sales, especially for the first as much as you can, because I've made that mistake. I think one of the first things I did a few months into launching our product was like, all right, we need a sales guy. And I hired a sales guy and it was just a disaster. And I feel bad because he moved and we were still experimenting, trying to figure things out. It didn't work. I think product is the same way. The founding team should be running product. You can't make the calls that need to be made. You're a founder, right? The product managers can't do it because they're working. There's a level of, I don't want to mess this up and I need to protect my job. So I think there's always a level of that, right? Whereas you as the founder, you will just go ham with it and make decisions that maybe don't make sense at the time, but you feel like they're the right moves and you're going to steer the company that way. So when do you hire a product manager? I think your rule of thumb seems reasonable, but for me, it would be when we figured out that point of first demand in the market where people are saying yes, and they're going, this solves my problem and I'm totally willing to pay you for it. Once we get to that level, it's we've structured this from a packaging and a product perspective that, yeah, we've got the right mix of things here. This seems to be what people are really after. You can see this sometimes in companies. They'll be struggling for several years and it'll be like just going along fine. And they'll add a product or some feature, change it slightly. And all of a sudden it's just, oh, wow, this is really hit. And this is really exciting. It's the point of first demand they've tapped into. These like companies that need to educate their customer that they have a problem. That's a hard, not only do you have to educate the market that there's a problem there, then you have to, are they willing to hire for it? Like you have to do all those things. I would much rather go, what problem do you have that gets me closer to the solution I have over here that I can solve for you now, and then walk you into the education piece. If you can get that piece nailed, I think that's when you bring in a product manager, because now you've got something to really work with. You've got a job to be done. You understand where they're getting value. You've figured out how to monetize it. And now you're ready to go, well, how do we move on either edge of that?
Is another way to say the point of first demand is like the moment a customer says, shut up and take my money?
I heard
What's the difference?
describe it as hold out your cup and it fills up. Like you want some water, and you just put your cup out and it just fills up. So you've got the thing that will capture the demand that's already out there. Like people are out there actively hire for this thing, and all of a sudden they found your product. This happened to me the other day. So I'm a big fan of Stream Deck, right? And all the Elgato stuff because I'm a nerd and I like the streaming gear, even though I'm not a streamer. So I've got the Stream Deck Plus. I also use an XLR microphone that I just have a USB-C sort of adapter plugged in my laptop. But my microphone handily took batteries. Pretty cool. I didn't want to buy a separate audio mixer and all this other stuff. I wanted to keep it simple. I was changing batteries constantly because I would always forget to turn my microphone off. And so I went looking for another camera one day. I saw an Elgato site, and staring at me was this base for the Stream Deck I already had that has, hey, this has an XLR connector on it. You can just replace your base, and it has an XLR and a headphones out. And I'm like, take my money. That was a problem. I was trying to solve, and I was spending money on batteries or doing the recharge thing. It was totally worth it. It was like $160 Canadian. Just Amazon, bring it to me. That's the kind of the feeling you want. So that's kind of like the shut up and take my money that you mentioned.
Like audio engineering and being like, no wonder USB mics are like the Yeti mic where it's just a USB is like the starting mic. And it's probably good for most people because it's like, why do you want something that requires an XLR cable and then needs a preamp to power the mic? But then I got the Evo 4, which is $100. All the marketing was around people like me where it's like, oh yeah, it has automated gain adjustments. There's a couple of buttons. They definitely have different offers for more advanced settings, but no, I want to just be able to plug in my XLR, let it figure out what the right gain is, and yeah, shut up and take my money. That right there, even though mentally that sounds so simple, that is so hard.
Well, someone had to
like, that's a lot of work.
It's a problem, right? And build a simple solution for it. Someone had to realize that there was a ton of people out there going, I'm so frustrated with this thing and I don't know how to do it. And I spent all my time messing with that instead of creating content. Someone had to figure that out.
Yeah.
And that's product.
Yeah. And seeing the macro trends, podcasting is getting more popular. You and I aren't media guys.
No.
But we had to become media guys because the cost of distribution is so cheap that it makes total sense to start a podcast or a YouTube channel. That tells me there's a certain level of hustle and thought, because a lot of product managers, they think their job is to be a designer with no skills. It's, oh, I'm going to come up with the ideas, put it into Jira and make stuff. But Marty Kagan mentioned if a product manager was actually doing their job, they wouldn't have time to bother engineering and design. They'd be way too busy doing other stuff. And so if you were to make like a real, like honest job description of what real product management looks based off your experience, like up and down, like the, I guess, software supply chain, and now you're at the like top of it of like offer and pricing, like how would you give like a non-generic honest answer of what a product manager is being hired for?
Yeah, that's a tough question. That's what it's really put me on the spot here. For me, I think their main job is really truly understanding how customers get value over and over again, having the ability, and this is where the founder mindset comes in, to turn that into product features to deliver on that value. The ideal product managers go in with a very open mind and think that they don't know the problems. They don't understand the solutions. Because if we go in thinking we already have the problem solved in our head and now we want to go validate that it's a problem, it's the wrong way around. I think having people that are super open-minded, check their ego on it. They're not the smartest one in the room. The customers have to be able to guide us here. The customer's not always right. I'm not saying listen to the customer and then build what they ask for. I'm saying listen to what their problems are underneath what they've asked for, and then figure out how we deliver on that value. I really think that a product manager's job should be, they should be so busy talking to customers that they have no time for anything else. I think that's really where it should be.
Yeah, there's a startup that was acquired by Bill.com in Utah called Divvy. I'm calling from Utah, by the way. They don't have PMs. They call them GMs. And it's very clear they're doing sales calls and demoing ideas and concept testing in the context of sales. And so I think they figured out a way to scale founder-led sales through the comp plan and everything. Really good designers and engineers were good at the project management side of improving the software. A good PM should know how to sell and get the pulse of the market, understand a lot of the stuff that you're talking about and providing to your customers. I think you're not going to piss anyone off. You probably just save some careers with that advice, to be honest. I'll tie up the loose end before we move on to the final round of questions. Whenever I'm coaching or providing advice to a designer or product manager trying to get better, they're like maybe hitting a plateau. I'm just like, watch the TV show The Offer on Paramount Plus. It's the story of how the movie The Godfather was made. And the story is about this engineer at Rand Corp that wanted to be a producer in Hollywood. And he snuck onto the Paramount lot and procured a meeting with the head of the studio. And he's, I want to be a producer. And the head of the studio liked his and everything and asked him, hey, do you know what a producer is? And he's like, yeah, I hire the actors and I like make sure the project manage and stuff. Like it's almost like what most people think product management is. But the producer is the person that does whatever it takes to get the movie made. Throughout the series of the show, it's a nice analog to product development. You got to hire the director. You got to fight with the director. The director's fighting with other specialists. And then he's making friends with the mob. So they let them film in New York City. And then he has to let the mob know that, hey, we're not going to make Italian Americans look bad. This is a story about a family. The advice I give, a product manager does whatever it takes to make sure that this succeeds in the market, making tickets every day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny. I really enjoy product. I came up through software development, but I love product. I was like an engineer, but was always on that side. The reason I love monetization so much is because it sits at the intersection of all the chaos. We've got product, engineering, sales, marketing, customer success, finance. You've got all these departments and monetization touches all of them. That's what I really love about it, because that role, you have to work with everybody to smooth it out and get it done, which is another reason why I think a lot of companies struggle with pricing. Who owns is another big challenge.
You need someone to glue it all together and harmonize the business. And that's why when you have a good product manager, you feel it. And when they're gone, you miss them big time. Bill, is there anything that you feel like hasn't been said that should be said before we wrap up? And how can people find your work?
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of stuff. It's been fantastic.
Enjoyed it.
The big thing I want to leave people with is that monetization is product and product is monetization. Those two things go hand in hand. And we need to be looking at our product decisions through the lens of monetization more than we do now. And so I think that's the big takeaway I want to leave to your audience. If you want to find out more about me, the best way is on LinkedIn. I'm just WDR Wilson everywhere. Just search for me, Bill Wilson, Pace Pricing. And you'll find me. I post pricing page teardown videos. I try and do it weekly, and they're a lot of fun. And so I try and educate the market with my hot takes on very popular SaaS companies' pricing pages. And I post regularly about pricing, and I love to help.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Hey, listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download.